Uday. Yeah, thanks so much for doing this interview today. And I've known Uday since year 2000 at Carnegie Mellon.
Hmm.
Yeah, when we're in the same program, and I think I was a year ahead, right?
Yep.
And today, what the topic that we want to talk about is more on Agile and Sprint and how that fits into the whole UX process.
Hmm.
So can you start off by introducing yourself a little bit about your background? Because I know you have done it all, like from corporate consultancy, to agency and your own thing. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you so much. Good to see you, Elaine. And thank you for allowing me to participate in this interview slash conversation. So in terms of my background, I don't know if I've done it all, but I've certainly done quite a bit. It's been nearly 20 years of practicing design, which kind of blows me away when I think about it. I am what I would consider, I guess, a traditionally trained designer. I got my degree in industrial design at University of Michigan way back in the late 90s. I then got my degree or master's degree in interaction design at Carnegie Mellon, where we had met. Upon completion of that degree, that's when I was recruited by Oracle in Silicon Valley to come out and join their very large and well-trained UX team. And that was the beginning of my journey of being a designer. So from there, I was tackling problems around enterprise software, moving that software from the desktop to the web. So this is really the beginning of web-based applications. And yes, I've worked at a wide range of large corporations, such as Oracle, Adobe, Cisco, Citrix, but also some consulting agencies. I worked briefly at Frog Design, an independent boutique, and I've done my own personal consulting, which I found to be a very good kind of palate cleanser between kind of those full-time jobs. Just try something different, new kinds of projects, different problems. And I've found that consulting is a really nice way to maybe land your next job because, having that project becomes a good way to kind of test out that relationship between each other and see if you like each other and want to work full time.
So what are you doing now?
Yeah, so I'm now a UX architect at a company called Automation Anywhere in San Jose, basically in Silicon Valley. And just to describe the company a little bit, when people think of or hear the word automation, folks tend to think about robotics. It's kind of like that, but it is not about hardware. This is about software. So software bots that can automate business processes, particularly those processes that are high frequency. This is basically where you create bots to help automate high frequency business processes and help basically make the user's time much more efficient for other activities that can leverage imagination, creativity, and more strategic kind of activities, strategic work.
Right. So that means, I guess in the near future, we don't need companies that are so big, right? Because a lot of the, routine work will be replaced by automation, by bots, and then humans can do more creative stuff. Is that?
That's part of the thinking. The idea here is not necessarily to replace people, but it's actually to augment people. So think of this as augmentation or amplification of the human potential. So you've got a worker, they spend, let's say 8 hours a day working, but maybe 4 to 5 hours, literally half the day, is on mundane routine tasks when that work can be done with something that's much more creative and strategic. And so think of a bot potentially becoming like a digital helper that can take care of these activities while helping that person become more effective within their overall job.
I see. So how long has your startup been around and how big is the company?
So it's been around for, I believe, over 10 years. And the founders are still there with the company. They've been very involved. We are considered, I think, kind of pre-IPO We are around 2,600 worldwide, which is large,
Right.
but it's not uncommon. What I've found is the notion of startup varies along a continuum from just 25 people, or 5 person or whatever, to something as large as, a couple thousand around the world.
How do you consider when it's still a startup? Is it like a still funded or?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes back to the funding, because right now I think we got our Series B, I think it was, yeah, B round last fall, so fall 2019.
I see. Got it. Got it. Okay, so let's just dive into the topic of today. Okay.
Sure.
I remember you came over to Hong Kong maybe more like 2 years ago,
Yeah.
and we invited you at IXDA Hong Kong for a talk, and
Yep.
then you touched upon this topic about Agile, and with a little bit of frustration, I guess. Nowadays, like everybody's talking about Agile, but then
Yep.
how does it fit with the UX process? Because when we do UX properly, we usually dive deep into user research and strategy before we actually build something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen everywhere, like even a lot of the UX boot camps are just allowing like not even 1 week to do research
Mm-hmm.
properly. So maybe can you address that, and what was your experience based on all your different companies like in the past?
Yeah, so this is always a tricky challenge. And it's important to understand that Agile itself is a methodology for increasing the efficiency of software development.
Mm-hmm.
And the emphasis is development. It's on engineering. It is
Yeah.
producing code. So it is not about user experience fundamentally. Now, the challenge is, how do we try to steer that train towards a user experience orientation, where truly people and the problems of people become, kind of the guiding light. So the thing about Agile is, when you realize that it is highly iterative, it is highly based upon kind of this mechanized approach towards solving very specific, I would say almost tactically kind of myopically scoped kind of problems, right? Fixing little things without being aware of the broader strategic nature of the system that you're tackling. Therein lies the problem, right? Because user experience and everything that is involved within that, in terms of information architecture, interaction design, visual design, human factors, and of course research, is fundamentally about looking at the overlaps and dependencies of multiple pieces of a system and how they all come together. If you're building a car, just to use a physical analogy, yes, you have a team that's working on, let's say, the side mirrors, or the headlamps. Yes, but you also have to be aware of the steering wheel and the trunk and the hood and the doors and how they all kind of come together, right, with the seats and so forth. So what needs to happen is a conversation with those engineering leaders and product leaders that are driving an agile forward kind of approach. And it has to be a conversation rooted in a couple of things. One is, how do we increase our learning cycles, which is the research, and making sure that research is not simply a checkbox of we talked to 3 people, but it's actually a deeper dive awareness of we have a lot of unknowns and we need to develop a deeper understanding of those unknowns. Another is, how do we make sure that we are not kind of getting sucked into the myopic nature of designing tedious little features or tiny little features without being aware of the entire system. So
Right.
this requires an understanding of what are those system pieces, how do they fit with each other, the relationships and dependencies, technical dependencies, human dependencies, cultural, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a third kind of aspect to this, which is recognizing that there should be a design system, cohesive elements, UI components, and so forth, that can pull everything together so that, yes, while there is rapid iteration on specific features, they are still abiding by a grounded set of principles and patterns and components, so that when those pieces and those features get, resolved, it feels like it is fitting into something much bigger and cohesive.
So where in the, because okay, so if a designer joins a team that's been taught Agile, and they think Agile starts from day one, okay,
Right.
and then you as a designer think you need to do research before and strategy before you even start to design the whole car, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, how do you handle that, right?
Yeah, and so this comes back to a little bit of reconditioning, or kind of unbrainwashing. So look, I mean, a designer's going to come in and think Agile day one. What a designer really needs to understand is the environment of the company that they're in. What is the maturity level of user experience within that company? What progress and decisions have been made?
Right.
Something I keep coming back to is the fact that every designer, whether it is a, fresh out of boot camp or someone at my level as an architect, every designer is always thrown into a situation of not of their own making, a situation where decisions have been made, conditions have been created, circumstances have been defined by leaders in the company, by product management, by engineering. And so it is incumbent upon a designer to try to ascertain that, to understand that, and make sense of that before, I gotta like crank out a feature and crank out a bunch of wireframes. Now, the reality is you may have to do some of that anyway in the beginning, because you have to create that trust, that relationship that you can be counted on to deliver stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of, yeah, you're going to deliver some of that, but as you deliver it, try to make sense of the overall situation in the company context, while trying to educate and help inform those leaders who are pushing Agile as to why research matters, why a systemic perspective matters, why a design system matters.
Right, right. So, I mean, I remember last year when I met you, the Bay Area,
Yeah.
I was surprised that, user research is not as common or widely understood, even in the Bay Area, even in Silicon Valley. Can you talk to that a little bit about that, and why is that? I mean, the case?
Yeah, so I think there are different angles to that, right? So yes, you have specific companies or certain, I'm going to call them flagship companies like Salesforce, Oracle, SAP, Citrix, and so forth, Adobe, that have a deep understanding of research and design, and they've built up, very large teams, UX teams with researchers and so forth. But then you start looking at other companies, and this may be more true of startups, where their focus is on immediate impact, immediate delivery, immediate results to show and prove to investors. And so for them, having capacities of research is not possible, just financially and otherwise. Now, do they have an understanding of research? They may have some level of understanding, at least to the degree of, did you talk to some people? Now, but that obviously we know that is not research, right? That's talking to people.
What to talk at, like who to involve, and
right, who to involve, what kind of questions to ask, how to frame the questions, and so forth. So, and we know that there is an art to research, and it takes a tremendous amount of experience. I remember a few years ago, when I was doing my consulting, I was reached out by the CEO of a startup, and he had tremendous experience in the sense that, I mean, he looked like he was like 56 years old. He had worked at like Oracle and a bunch of other places like that. So he obviously had a lot of experience. And then I was making the pitch to him because he wanted me to create a bunch of wireframes and prototypes. And I said, well, first, why don't we do a cycle of research to truly deeply understand the customers that you're targeting? And I kind of went through a litany of some sample questions, that kind of a thing, like a sample study, what that would look like. And he looked at me kind of perplexed. And I'm like, I asked, so what's the issue? I know this sounds like a lot, but we could do this in a, in a pretty quick fashion. And he said, yeah, but why can't my product manager just do all that?
Ah, yeah.
Right? It's like, why do we need to hire someone to ask questions when our product manager can do that? It's a fair point, but here's the problem. That product manager is already running on fumes, cranking out Jira tickets and stories and epics and trying to talk to customers about sales or trying to get a sale, right? They're trying to talk to customers about other things, not about the problems that they have in their life or in their work, right? It's a different tenor and cadence of conversation that needs to happen. And oftentimes I find that product managers, they quote, gather requirements, right? Mm-hmm. Which is often either stuff they made up about, what they want for themselves, right? Uh-huh. It's kind of a distortion of empathy in that they try to put themselves in the mind of a customer and then think, yeah, I would like that feature.
Right.
But then there's the other side of it, which is the requirements aspect. They're taking what customers tell them, right? So it's kind of like a burger shop. Okay, I want, a quarter pounder with cheese, hold the pickles, extra mayo, and a double-sided fries. Oh, yeah. Those are the requirements. I got the requirements. I'm gathering them.
Yeah.
Okay. The problem being solved is someone has, I'm just totally making this up, going with the burger analogy. Someone is hungry and needs to be satisfied. And they have an appetite for something with, bread and meat and veggies. Okay, that can be solved in lots of different ways. It doesn't have to be a burger, right? Yeah. And so that's the shift that needs to happen with an understanding about research. It's not just talking to people and, writing down like an order, like a menu order.
Yeah.
But it's actually deeply trying to understand what problems do they have.
Right. Actually, this is an interesting point because there's often an overlap between product manager's senior role and a senior UX designer's role. Yep. So sometimes they on each other's foot, right?
Yeah, yeah.
How do you resolve it because there's a misalignment of perception of what each other does, right?
Yeah.
How do we resolve that if you run into such a situation?
Oh, yeah. And in fact, I actually recently wrote an article in ACM Interactions about the blurring boundaries. And it's based on a conversation I had with Christian Crumlish. He is a information architect / UX designer, now product manager person. Okay. And so he kind of straddles that kind of spectrum. And he totally gets that whole blurring of boundaries. But to speak to this issue, I don't know if it's about resolving. Yes, there's going to be a natural blurring of boundaries. The trick here, though, is how do you kind of define what someone is accountable for? And making sure within the accountability structure, okay, the PM is accountable for the Jira stories and, lining up the resources and making sure engineering is equipped and ready to build out accordingly, while the designer is accountable for understanding what is the design direction, what is the scenario and the use cases and so forth, and yes, creating the assets that will help a product. But within that accountability structure, there needs to be a partnership model that, yes, we are both working together to help solve a problem for a person. And it's that helps, I think, defuse a situation where it's about, what do I own? What do you own? We're accountable for certain things and we will provide certain deliverables, but at the end of the day, we have to work together and it has to be a partnership where we're fully transparent with each other about that.
Right, which brings us to the next point is, like, in order to do that, you need to have skills to either convince people, educate, facilitate,
influence,
influence other non-designers, right?
Exactly.
And one of the things that's happening in our industry, I think, is my observation is there is no lack of jobs in UX. I mean, tons of companies are hiring. a lot are hiring like maybe above 5 years experience.
Mhm.
But then there are a gazillion people like UX wannabes. They want to
Sure.
get into the industry.
Yep.
Like they're doing all sorts of things. They're like taking this boot camp, going to that like online video course.
Yep.
And then there are tons of people telling us they can't find jobs.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm wondering, I think there's a educational gap or a
Yeah.
skill gap happening.
Right. Right. I think so. And you've hit upon something that's totally true, in that there is this gap between, yes, there is there's a whole bunch of jobs out there, UX jobs of varying, levels and skills and so forth. Now, part of that gap, I think that there are a couple of things going on there, right? So one is, for the companies that are hiring UX designers and researchers and so forth, what is the level of maturity of UX within those organizations? Do they even know what they are hiring for? So there's a little bit of doubt about that.
Yeah.
And I can relay just a very quick story where a couple of years ago, I replied to a job ad. It was asking for a principal level UX designer, and principal is obviously quite high. Someone who's driving patterns and processes and strategies and all that kind of stuff. After I went through the interview process, I thought it would be a slam dunk and everyone would be like, "Yay, let's do this. Let's go for it." I got an email like 2 weeks later from HR saying, "Oh, I'm sorry. It turns out we really just need a visual lead." And so, I think there is a little bit of misunderstanding even within companies as to the kind of designer they're looking for and the roles and positions to actually set up to hire for them, and how to title them and level them and all that kind of stuff. So there's that. So that's going on. Then on the other hand, yeah, so for folks who are coming out of boot camps, or, they watched a 4-hour video, they may not have necessarily the skills that are being required and asked for. Knowing how to create.
For us, like what those skills are that's missing.
Yeah. So, when you go into boot camps, when you come out of a boot camp, yes, you've gotten exposure to certain tools and methods like wireframing and flow diagrams and stuff like that, and hopefully a few other activities. But the reality is a full-time job, and I say this as someone who's been on that side of hiring and helping hire designers. For a full-time job, the people who are hiring, they're looking for someone who can do. You've got folks coming out of UX boot camps who may be exposed to the methods and tools of wireframing, flow diagramming, and various other activities, but exposure is not enough. And I say this as someone who's been on kind of the other side of hiring, actually helping managers, hiring the designers and so forth. Exposure is not enough. It's about hiring someone who has experience in applying these methods and tools in such a way that they've dealt with the inevitable hiccups and explosions of problems, and dealing with the pushback and arguments, and knowing how to navigate ambiguity and complexity of problems, business problems, engineering problems. It's not about hiring someone who can just crank out a wireframe. It's about hiring people who know how to think through a problem and understand all the various issues at the different levels, and be able to at least have a conversation with some confidence, some conviction, with a PM, with an engineer, with a sales manager, whoever it is, and be able to take, yeah.
Describe those type of skills. Is it critical thinking? Is it problem solving skills, or communication skills, language? Like what exactly?
Yeah.
I think the problem is sometimes those are not spelled out on a job description.
Yes, unfortunately, unfortunately, they are framed as these kind of what are called soft skills, which I think is actually not a good phrase to use. These are fundamentally leadership skills. because designers have to think of themselves as leaders or future leaders, because they're often, you know, negotiating with or arguing with other leaders in the company. And so the way I frame these skills, and again, I wrote an article about this, happy to send you the link. So basically, I think of these as these kind of hidden abilities of a designer, one of which is, or I should say hidden roles and the abilities therein. One role is being a therapist. So just learning how to actively listen to, you know, the requirements or the problem statement or whatever, and actually hear the feedback and inputs coming in from a team, a cross-functional team, and not just knee-jerk reacting, but just listening and absorbing, right? And trying to figure out what the issue is. The second is being an interpreter. So oftentimes, you know, engineers are going to write up their thing, the PM will write up their thing, you know. So you got all these kind of requirements and write-ups and stories and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of the time, you know, they don't really match up with each other. They're kind of out of sync. So it's up to the designer to kind of interpret the real meaning. What's really going on here? What are we trying to create, and what are we solving for? And who is this really for? And it may turn out that everyone's at odds with each other and actually have fundamental disagreements with each other. This is more true in startups, but even large companies. And large companies, you have the challenge of different silos or departments. They're not talking to each other because of the nature of the organizational structure. So you may be asked to design feature X. It turns out a department somewhere else, they designed feature X.2. You know, they've already designed it and they've already done some other stuff with it. You know, so those kind of redundancies can happen. So anyway, your ability to interpret, and are we on the same page? Are we aligned? And then finally, I would say being a philosopher. And this is really going back to asking why. Why are we doing this? What is the purpose? What is the benefit? The benefit to us as a business, the benefit to the customer, the market, the industry, and so forth. And really at least have the bravery of convictions to ask those questions.
Right. And do you think, I mean, as a junior designer, is that the sort of expectation already, or?
No, and see, that's the problem. So you have to grow into that. There's no way anybody, unless I'm sure there's some who are exceptionally talented and outgoing and so forth, they can take that on. But for the vast majority, as a junior designer, to suddenly try to be a therapist, an interpreter, a philosopher, and all these things, is going to be way too much. And so you have to grow into it, which then implies there needs to be some kind of mentoring and coaching. And this is where I have a problem with startups that hire a very junior designer because they just need someone to crank out a bunch of wireframes to give to engineering.
Yeah.
And that's all they want, right? We're in an agile cycle. We need wireframes. The engineer's waiting. They've been waiting for 6 months. You know, they're ready to code. That is not a setup for success.
So do you feel that even in Silicon Valley, there's a lack of mentorship and coaching?
Oh yeah, totally. The problem is nobody has time. The reason nobody has time is everyone is overworked with Jira tickets and design or deadlines and so forth. And it's
on one hand is a good problem because that means our industry is highly demanded, right? But then
yeah, to some degree. Now let me come back to that and say at larger companies, the Salesforce, SAP, Adobe, those companies, yes, they will have coaching and mentoring structures in place because they have large enough teams, they have structures down, processes down, and they can create the space and the time for the mentoring and coaching. Right.
I see. So it's unless you get into a large company, you sort of don't have that benefit of, right.
Exactly. And in fact, right now at Automation Anywhere, I've begun a formal mentoring program with one designer. It's kind of like a pilot. We'll run it for a couple of quarters and see how it goes and see if we can scale it out. But it's tough because, you know, when the design team is kind of small, you know, we're at like 20 something people, 25 people. but we're all way overworked with so many requests.
Right. Right.
It becomes tough.
Yeah. So for a junior designer, like I've heard junior designer says, well, all the companies need at least 2 to 5 years of experience. I'm just starting off.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
they can't, like, how do they even get in, right? What's your suggestion?
Yeah, it takes experience to get experience, right?
Yes.
It's kind of a vicious cycle kind of problem. I think, one opportunity to think about is internships,
Mm-hmm.
or some kind of apprenticeship model, but we don't really do that in the States. I don't know about other countries. So maybe internship is the best route. Um, Maybe try to work at a startup if there are a couple other designers already there who can take you under the wing. And, like I said, it's hard to coach and mentor in a startup, but maybe the role modeling, like you observe, right? You're shadowing and observing and trying to get it that way in terms of the understanding and learning.
Osmosis, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So as a hirer, I'm sure you've hired tons of designers in the past. Like, what makes a junior person hireable versus not hireable? Can you spell those?
Yeah. So for a junior designer, what we're looking for is this kind of energy, passion, appetite to learn, um, kind of a scrappy kind of attitude of, kind of willing to try anything and do anything. And just this hunger, you can't teach that, right? If you have this hunger to just want to learn and a willingness to kind of fall down and, scrape your knee and but pick yourself back up, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So a willingness to learn, a desire to learn, a desire to just, make mistakes and fall down. But, a passion to just keep, wanting to grow as a designer.
Yeah. Okay. And like with the candidates that you've interviewed, like what are some of the gaps that you've seen?
Yeah.
Or
So
misalignment of expectations. They probably come in thinking after the boot camp they can get a great job with a great salary, right? Like
yeah,
one of those.
right. So in addition to the passion and hunger and desire and willingness to learn, there needs to be some baseline applicability of skills, right? Basic UX skills, information architecture, information design, interaction design, visual design, and so forth. And just have some kind of basic level of understanding. Um, because the thing about, like, this is the way I would say it, to hire a junior designer is not to hire someone to train them in those areas. The expectation is how to do all those things,
Right.
but you want to know how to do it in a way that sets you up to become a future leader, and to gain the professional experience of tackling different problems, contexts, situations.
So if you look at a portfolio, like what would be red flags?
Well, the first is being able to articulate your own story, and the story around the problem you're trying to solve, and the story of a project from start to finish, highlighting especially situations where you made a mistake, and what insights did you gain and learn, what lessons did you learn, how did you work with engineers, how did you work with product managers, etc., how did you deal with business constraints, etc. So that's number one red flag: inability to articulate that story. Other red flags, just sloppy presentations. Make it look good, make it look nice. Don't just use a PowerPoint template or clip art.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so what if the designer, a lot of junior designers says, I'm just starting off. I don't even have the chance to work with other non-designers yet. So how am I supposed to build a portfolio that has all those things, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's tough. A few suggestions. Maybe do some work pro bono for free, that gives you some design experience. You could try to solve design problems, like if you could redesign Spotify or whatever. take some challenges of your own and spend some time resolving those challenges, building prototypes and stuff like that. Maybe do some user testing. Like I built a prototype of Spotify, version 10. Okay, go out, do some feedback,
So
user feedback sessions.
a teacher's project would work for you as long as they can demonstrate their thinking.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah.
And also, I've also found a lot of designers who does not have a design background are wanting to become a UX designer. For example, they're coming from marketing, like even like engineering or industrial design and graphic design are the better ones, right?
Yeah.
But then even architects, right? But some of them have zero design background, like they came from physics.
Yeah.
So like what should they do, in that situation?
First, really fundamentally self-question. Why are you shifting out of this field into UX? What's the goal? What's the purpose? It's like applying a design lens to it. What do you hope to gain out of this? What's the benefit for you? Why do you think UX is the right thing for you? What skills do you bring from accounting, physics, engineering, whatever it is that you think will be applicable to UX?
Do you think it's a must for a UX designer to have design skills?
It depends what you mean by design skills. I say yes.
Yeah.
But oftentimes that question, it's a loaded question because I think the ulterior motive behind that question is, should a UX designer have visual design skills?
Yeah, be able to execute or, manifest their thinking, right?
Yes, exactly. And I say absolutely 100% yes, because as a designer, as a UX designer, part of your job is storytelling and communication. Everyone knows a picture is 1,000 words, and an expectation by everyone else who is not in UX is that, hey, we hired that UX designer. Where are the cool pictures, right? They're going to expect, they don't know what it is, but they expect something that's visually engaging. Now, I don't mean exciting for the glamour. I mean, it's engaging because you're able to visually tell a story, either through storyboarding, data visualization, mapping and diagramming, whatever it is. So in that regard, yes.
Yes, because in larger companies, usually like the user researcher basically does user research, right? Or user, and that's also under the UX umbrella. But that person does not necessarily have visual skills, right?
Well, it's interesting because we hired, a lead researcher who has some visual skills. So part of his portfolio presentation to us was showing us some sample reports he did. And one thing we all noticed was, wow, they look really nice.
Yeah.
There's a visual element to them. He's not a trained visual designer, but he's got some sensibility that, I can't put 5,000 words on a slide. So instead, I'm going to put 3 diagrams, and I have little icons representing the personas or industries.
Right.
Boom, right there. And it makes a point because this researcher is going to have to communicate that same thing to possibly the CEO or some other executive leader. So visual communication in that regard, yes, very important. Now, I want to distinguish, though, visual communication to influence and persuade, storytell, versus visual production of assets that are going to go into a product. So that's a whole other level of skill and capability, which, that's highly specialized.
Yes. So if somebody does not have design skills, want to come in, what's your best advice for them?
I would highly recommend trying to do some visual communication exercises, read up some books, try to practice visual communication.
Okay. Or go back to school for that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
I think that is a huge gap right now. It's really only people with basic design background, like from industrial design, graphic design, architecture, kind of have like at least you need to know how to use Illustrator and Photoshop, right?
Well, you need to be able to visually communicate. So if it's sketching or whatever it is, but yeah. If you're coming from physics and mathematics, I mean, physics, you do visual diagrams too. I mean, accounting, right? Spreadsheets world. If you're coming from that, it may be much more of a struggle. I would encourage
that. Marketing people who want to become UX designers.
Right.
Or advertising, like.
Maybe, yeah. But yeah, it's a critical skill.
Great. So anything else you want to add?
No. I mean, this was a good conversation. Hopefully, this helps people understand the dynamics of user experience in Agile. It takes a lot of work, but if you ground it in a place of confidence and conviction about building a partnership and trying to, improve, I guess the quality of the experience someone is trying to have, that will help everyone, I think, make progress.
Okay. Thank you, Uday.
Thanks you so much, Elaine.
Yeah, I learned a lot. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Remember to like, subscribe, and share our video so more people can understand how to get into the UX industry. Remember to like, subscribe, and share our video so more people can understand how to get into the UX industry.